In early 1700s Europe, the Catholic Church absolutely dominated the continent, but social change brought a rise in Protestantism. The Hellfire Club began as a small social clique in Dublin, Ireland. It was founded by Philip Wharton, the first Duke of Wharton, in 1719. He was in his early 20s and he was known for his growing feelings of angst toward the Catholic Church. And this angst brought many of its earliest members together. When Philip was thinking of a name for his club, he wanted it to sound like a rebellion against the church. So what other way to do that than naming your club the Hellfire Club? Which this played into the idea that the members were condemned to hell and their meetings were focused on sin and blasphemy. But many of the earliest members just used the club as an excuse to drink heavily, especially Philip. The Age of Enlightenment brought free thinkers. Scientific breakthroughs and rational thinking began to change the way Europeans saw the world. And as their worldviews changed, so did their faith. Many no longer wanted to blindly follow religion like they had for so many years. The earliest Hellfire members fully embraced satanic rumors and stories. One legend tells of a Dublin farmer trying to spy on the group at the Eagle Tavern. During one of the meetings, he walked around the building, hoping to overhear their conversations, but someone spotted him. When the devils caught him, they dragged the man inside. If he was so curious about what they were doing, they would give him a first-hand experience, and when the man was later released, he had permanent psychological damage. His family found him the next morning wandering aimlessly through his fields. When they asked him what had happened, he couldn't speak. The experience was so terrifying, he couldn't explain anything that had happened during the Hellfire ceremony, and he never spoke again for the rest of his life. The more stories like this spread, the more interested people became. But this also meant they created more enemies. One time, a member of the Freemasons threw a dead goose down the tavern's chimney and smoked all the members out. But Philip, the Duke of Wharton, enjoyed the pranks on his club. He saw it as a sign that his club's popularity was growing, and he actually ended up joining the Freemasons in 1722. And a few months later, he became a Grand Master. And he was so consumed by the Freemasons, he didn't even bother with the Hellfire Club anymore, so the original group slowly disbanded. But this wouldn't be the end of Hellfire. It had become popular enough that other branches had opened up across Ireland. The problem was, the new branches were inspired by the old rumors, so these new offshoots were genuinely interested in Satanism, the occult, and dark rituals. In 1735, the first Earl of Ross, 33-year-old Richard Parsons, founded a chapter called the Irish Hellfire Club. Richard was known for dabbling in the art of black magic and the occult, and it was rumored that he referred to himself as the King of Hell, and he even wore a winged devil costume during the meetings. He also loved playing pranks on the local clergy. He was known for inviting priests to his home, and when the clergy approached, Richard would open the door completely naked. But his pranks didn't even come close to the actions of another Hellfire member, Henry Barry, Lord Santry. Henry was an alcoholic like many of the Hellfire members, and the more he drank, the more cruel and violent he became. It was well known he had a chairman that carried him and his throne throughout town, and one day the chairman fell ill and couldn't carry Henry around, so Henry cornered the man in his house and gave him a quart of brandy in order to help his illness. He forced the man to chug the entire bottle in front of him. The chairman did as he was told, and he soon passed out in his bed. As punishment for being ill on the job, Henry ignited a torch and set the man on fire, killing him. Henry wasn't just seen as a murdering psychopath. People also thought he was crazy because he was involved with the Hellfire Club. He was never prosecuted for his crime because he had a way of bribing witnesses with large sums of money to keep them quiet. He wasn't arrested until another violent encounter at a Hellfire meeting. While drunk, Henry drew his sword and stabbed a tavern employee who had laughed at him. After the murder, the bribes only worked for so long. Even though the club thrived on its dark reputation, it didn't need someone publicly murdering people, so a few members ended up turning Henry in. At Henry's trial, his defense claimed that the victim had survived for 6 weeks after the stabbing, and actually died from a rat bite, not a sword wound. But the jury didn't believe him. Henry then became the only member of the Irish House of Lords to be convicted of murder, and he was sentenced to death. But with all the support of high-ranking friends and family, he ended up escaping the death penalty. His wealthy uncle threatened to cut off Dublin's water supply if Henry was sentenced to death. And his supporters argued that Henry had only killed someone with low social standing, so the crime wasn't really that bad. Henry ended up receiving a full pardon. But after this, the Irish Hellfire Club struggled to recover. By the end of 1745, the public and even the club's own members were more disgusted with the Hellfire Club than ever before, so their membership numbers tanked. Plus, its older members suffered from poor health after years of heavy drinking. So the Hellfire meetings soon became a club for old, dying men. After the fall of the Irish Hellfire Club, the secret society lived on, and it soon found its way to London. This new branch's founder, Baron Francis Dashwood, loved rebelling against church authority. As a prank, he once got a minister to stroll through the gardens at his estate. As they walked along the narrow pathways between the hedges, the minister noticed the garden layout was nothing like he had ever seen, but Francis told him it only looked strange from the surface level. The best way to experience it was from above. So he took the minister up to a tower to see the garden from a bird's eye view. Several stories up, the minister looked down and saw the garden was in the shape of a nude woman, and the fountains made it look like milk was pouring from her nipples. A third fountain between her legs made it look like she was urinating. As the minister fainted from the sight, Francis laughed hysterically. Francis then poured a mix of brandy and sulfur down the minister's throat, and when he came to, the minister asked Francis what was in the mysterious concoction. Francis told him it was a concoction of brandy and sulfur he invented, called brimstone. These stories about Francis spread. The old hellfire rumors of devils and perversions started up again, and Francis's public pranks continued. One time, a large Catholic mass was being held somewhere in Italy, and as the people sat in their pews, they noticed a strange figure dressed in a massive dark cloak sitting near them. The figure's hood was large, and he tilted his head so no one could see their face. Halfway through the services, the figure stood up and charged the altar. From his hip, he pulled out a coiled whip, and once he had gotten everyone's attention, he promised to give everyone their penance before Judgment Day. And then he just began cracking that whip in the air, emphasizing each word he said. The onlookers thought the devil himself had appeared in the church, and in a panic, the cloaked figure chased them all outside. A few men eventually tackled and restrained the figure, and when they pulled back the hood, they saw it was only the Baron, Francis Dashwood. Francis became known for his pranks against the clergy and churchgoers, but in private, he often struggled with his faith and spirituality for years. Sometimes he would publicly mock God, but other times his family would overhear him praying and weeping in his private quarters. But besides his crisis of faith, his two highest priorities was drinking heavily and having anonymous sex behind closed doors. So the new chapter of the Hellfire Club became his sanctuary. As the years passed, Francis struggled with his blasphemies and his belief in God. During Hellfire Club meetings, he would defy God, but in private, he secretly prayed and wished he could be closer to God. But meanwhile, the Hellfire Club raged on. The one final prank between two feuding members would soon cause its downfall. The main prankster was John Wilkes, a famous journalist and politician, and he wanted to get back at John Montague, the 4th Earl of Sandwich. The Earl was known as the biggest poser of the group. He always tried to act like he was the most scandalous member who loved the devil, but everyone knew he was secretly dedicated to God. So John decided to expose his hypocrisy. One night, John drunkenly dared the Earl to lock himself in one of the tunnel's cells, and the Earl agreed to prove he wasn't a coward. Other members watched as the Earl stumbled through the dark tunnel mazes late at night. He headed towards the cells near one of the chambers where he spotted John Wilkes sitting across the room from a large wooden chest. The chest made soft thumping noises, and the Earl could hear breathing coming from inside it. When he slowly approached and reached to open it, a giant, inhuman creature burst out of the chest. The figure tackled the Earl to the ground and clawed at his clothing. In a panic, the Earl tossed the hairy creature toward an opposite hallway and scrambled into the darkness. The Earl had no idea what it was, but he thought it might have been the devil trying to drag him to the depths of hell.
So John Wilkes ended up getting what he wanted because as the Earl was fleeing out of the temple, he said, quote, "Spare me, gracious devil, spare a wretch who never was sincerely your servant. I sinned only from vanity of being in the fashion. Thou knowest I never have been half so wicked as I pretended, never have been able to commit the 1,000th part of the vices which I have boasted of. Leave me, therefore, and go to those who are more truly devoted to your service. I am but half a sinner." So basically he admitted, I'm a fraud. And I love how in the end of his confession, he says, I'm but half a sinner.
Yeah.
I'm still a sinner, but I'm not as hardcore as
I'm
you
only
thought
50% a sinner.
Yeah. I don't know. I do get like frat bro vibes from these guys.
Well, that's what it sounds like from the stories we were just talking about.
Yeah. So yeah, it's crazy we could draw parallels between Hellfire Club and a frat.
You could call it, most frats the Hellfire Club, honestly.
Yeah, honestly, excessive drinking.
Yeah.
There you go, yeah.
Light out. Everybody.